We consider Cressida our only real child. She is the soul of this family." Those words were spoken with a terrifying, casual ease. They hung in the air of the most exclusive, high-end restaurant in downtown Chicago, floating above the clinking of fine crystal glasses and the soft, ambient glow of overhead chandeliers. My father, Alaric, stood at the head of the long, opulent dining table. His glass of vintage champagne was raised high, catching the light, but he was not looking at me when he delivered that soul-crushing line. His eyes were locked with unwavering adoration on my younger sister, Cressida. She sat across from him, draped casually in an $8,000 Chanel dress. A dress, I might add, that was paid for by a corporate credit card. I had just spent 3 grueling, sleepless weeks restructuring so our family business would not sink into immediate bankruptcy. I sat there at the edge of the table, entirely frozen. The heavy cream envelope containing their financial salvation, the final, notarized refinancing contract, rested against my leg under the velvet tablecloth. My heart pounded against my ribs in a slow, deafening thud that completely drowned out the polite, enabling applause of our extended family. The sheer audacity of his statement was suffocating. The breathtaking disrespect felt like a physical blow to the stomach. I had poured my life, my pristine credit score, and the last shreds of my sanity into keeping Alaric Buildcorp afloat. I was the invisible scaffolding holding up their fragile, rotting empire of lies and bad debts. And yet, here I was, completely erased with a single, brutal sentence in front of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. Cressida slowly turned her head and caught my eye across the table. She did not look away out of guilt or embarrassment. Instead, the corners of her perfectly glossed lips curled upward into a slow, deliberate smirk. It was a silent, venomous victory lap. She knew exactly what she was doing. She always did. She was feeding on my humiliation. The anger that washed over me in that moment was not hot, loud, or chaotic. It was freezing cold. It was the kind of blinding, absolute rage that suddenly clarifies everything in your life, stripping away years of misplaced loyalty, toxic family guilt, and that pathetic, stubborn hope that one day they would finally love me. I did not cry. I did not scream or flip the table. I just stared at the people who were supposed to be my family and realized, with absolute certainty, that they were nothing but parasites feeding off my hard work. I pushed my heavy mahogany chair back. The harsh scrape of wood against the polished marble floor cut through the lingering applause like a jagged knife, silencing the table instantly. "Enjoy your night," I said. My voice was eerily steady, carrying a quiet weight that made my mother, Rowena, flinch in her seat. I picked up my purse, purposefully leaving the thick envelope containing their new refinancing contract tucked under my folded linen napkin. I turned my back on all of them and walked away. Every single step toward the exit felt like waking up from a long, suffocating nightmare. The cool Chicago night air hit my face the second I pushed through the heavy revolving doors, but the deep chill inside my chest remained. For 34 years, I had played the role of the dutiful, unproblematic daughter. I was Maeve, the corporate restructuring advisor, the one with the cold head for numbers, the one they called only when the walls were caving in and the collection agencies were knocking. Tonight was supposed to be a monumental dual celebration, the 35th anniversary of Alaric Buildcorp and my parents' 38th wedding anniversary. I had planned to give them the restructured debt agreement as the ultimate gift, a genuine lifeline. Instead, I received a public execution of my worth. I walked toward the valet stand, my mind racing through decades of memories. How many times had I let them step on me? How many times had my mother dismissed my 70-hour work weeks as just doing boring math, while simultaneously praising Cressida to the heavens for choosing the perfect napkin rings for a dinner party? My father's booming voice echoed relentlessly in my ears. Our only real child. As I handed my ticket to the young valet, my phone vibrated intensely in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, squinting at the bright screen. It was an urgent text message from Declan, the weary, 60-year-old head accountant at Alaric Buildcorp, and frankly, the only person in that entire building who actually knew the terrifying truth about the company's bleeding finances. The text read, "Maeve, I am so sorry to bother you tonight of all nights. But they just did something insane with the main corporate account. You need to look at the ledger right now. I just sent the encrypted files to your secure email. I stared at the glowing screen, the cold night wind whipping my hair across my face. The profound sadness I had felt mere minutes ago instantly evaporated, replaced by a razor-sharp, dangerous focus. They had finally poked the bear. They honestly thought I was just a silent, obedient workhorse who would take their abuse forever because we shared the same blood. But they forgot one crucial, fatal detail. I was the one holding the keys to their entire kingdom. What did they do? And more importantly, how fast could I tear it all down? The cab ride back to my apartment was an absolute blur of neon city lights and violently swirling thoughts. The moment I walked through my front door, I did not even bother taking off my coat or my heels. I threw my keys onto the kitchen counter, flipped open my laptop with shaking hands, and immediately accessed the secure server Declan had linked in his message. As the massive spreadsheets slowly loaded on my screen, my mind involuntarily drifted back to the museum of pain that was my childhood. Growing up, the family dynamic was always violently clear, a script written before I could even speak. Cressida was the radiant sun, and I was just a cold rock floating in the dark, lucky to catch a stray beam of their light. I vividly remembered being 12 years old, sitting alone at the kitchen table with my straight-A report card, waiting hours for my mother to come home. When Rowena finally burst through the door, she was holding 3 massive shopping bags filled with sequins and tulle. She had entirely forgotten my birthday because Cressida had a regional beauty pageant that weekend. "Oh, Maeve, please do not be so dramatic," my mother had sighed, rolling her eyes when I started to cry. "Your sister needs this for her confidence. You are smart, you do not need attention." That cruel dismissal became the defining mantra of my life. You are smart, you do not need attention. You are capable, so you can fix our messes while we pretend you do not exist. Over the last 3 years, Alaric Buildcorp had been spiraling toward a catastrophic, very public collapse. My father was a man completely obsessed with appearances and status. He played golf at the most expensive country club in the state, bought luxury cars he absolutely could not afford, and stubbornly refused to adapt his outdated business model to the modern market. When the massive debts piled up and the bank threatened to foreclose on their primary warehouses, they came crying to me. Not to Cressida, the self-proclaimed public relations director, who spent her highly paid days taking selfies in her oversized corner office. They came to the family scapegoat. To save them from total ruin, I had put my own pristine, hard-earned reputation on the line. I had personally guaranteed a $1.5 million line of credit for the company. On top of that staggering liability, I was paying $2,500 a month straight out of my own pocket to a ruthless corporate law firm, just to keep their angry suppliers from dragging my father into court. I was literally bleeding my own wealth, draining my own resources, to keep their fake high society lifestyle completely afloat. The spreadsheet finally appeared on my screen, pulling me back to the present. I leaned in, scanning the recent transactions, my eyes darting across the endless columns of numbers. And then I saw it. A withdrawal. A massive, glaring, unauthorized withdrawal authorized by Cressida and approved by Alaric just 4 hours ago, right before they walked into that anniversary dinner to humiliate me. $50,000. My breath hitched violently in my throat. I clicked on the transaction details, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. The money had been wired directly to a luxury yacht charter company. $50,000 drained from the very credit line I had personally guaranteed. The credit line meant solely to pay off the failing lumber suppliers and keep the warehouse workers employed, so the business would survive the quarter. I scrolled down further, my vision blurring with rage, and found an attached invoice that Declan had flagged with 3 red exclamation points. It was for a public relations and rebranding launch event, scheduled for next Monday. Cressida had taken $50,000 of my credit to throw a lavish yacht party for herself and her fake socialite friends, under the flimsy, insulting guise of marketing. I pushed back from the desk so hard my chair slammed into the wall. My hands were trembling, but not from sadness. This was pure, unadulterated fury. This was not just typical family favoritism anymore. This was theft. This was blatant financial sabotage. They were actively using my name, my credit, and my hard-earned leverage to fund a delusion, and then they had the absolute nerve to humiliate me in public just hours later, drinking champagne while my financial neck was on the chopping block. I walked over to the large floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the beautiful Chicago skyline. The city looked so peaceful and orderly from up here, but a violent storm was raging inside my apartment. I had spent years of my career analyzing distressed assets, restructuring corporate debt, and liquidating failing companies for my high-profile clients. I knew exactly how to save a business from the brink of death, but I also knew exactly how to dismantle one piece by piece until nothing was left but dust. My father thought I was just a spineless spreadsheet drone. My mother thought I was an endless, emotionless ATM. My sister thought she had permanently won the game. I picked up my phone and opened my secure banking app. I stared at the numbers representing that $1.5 million credit line. They truly thought they owned this money. They truly thought they owned me. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold anger settling deep into my bones, hardening into an unbreakable resolve. The pathetic pity party was officially over. The lifelong duty of the good, quiet daughter was officially dead. I looked at the digital clock on my wall. It was past midnight. Tomorrow was Friday. I knew exactly who I was going to call the moment the sun came up, and I knew exactly what I was going to do to them. The bomb was armed, and they were the ones who had smilingly handed me the detonator. I just had to decide the exact moment to push the button. Would they see it coming? My phone started vibrating relentlessly against the nightstand at exactly 7 in the morning. I had barely slept a wink, my mind operating like a churning engine of legal strategies, financial loopholes, and exit plans. I rolled over and glanced at the bright screen. It was Aunt Vesper, my mother's younger sister, and the family's undisputed, venomous gossip queen. I let the call go to voicemail, but the notification chimes kept pouring in. Ping, ping, ping. I sighed, unlocked my phone, and opened Facebook. There it was, sitting proudly at the very top of my feed like a pool of toxic sludge. Cressida had posted a long, incredibly dramatic status update, accompanied by a highly edited picture of our parents looking glamorous, yet falsely exhausted at the dinner table. Sometimes, the people you share blood with are the absolute most toxic ones, the public post began. Last night was supposed to be a beautiful, joyous celebration of my parents' incredible legacy and hard work. But dealing with a sibling who is constantly jealous, deeply insecure, and desperate to ruin family joy is just exhausting. Mental health is real, folks. Praying for those who simply can't handle seeing others shine. She had not explicitly tagged my name, but she absolutely did not need to. The comments section was already a vile cesspool of relatives and superficial family friends sending their prayers and praising Cressida for being so unbelievably strong and graceful. Aunt Vesper had commented right at the top. We all saw how she stormed out like a petulant child. So unstable. You and your parents are absolute saints for putting up with her manic episodes. It was a calculated, vicious smear campaign. She was actively trying to rewrite the narrative of the evening, painting me as the unhinged, jealous, mentally unstable sister to perfectly mask the terrifying fact that I was the only literal reason they were not living in a cardboard box on the street. I felt a painfully familiar tightness in my chest, the old, desperate urge to aggressively defend myself, to post the financial statements and scream the truth from the digital rooftops. But I forced my thumb to stop hovering over the keyboard. Arguing with a narcissist is like wrestling a pig in the mud. You both get filthy, but the pig actually enjoys it. Instead of typing a furious, emotional reply, I put on my running shoes, grabbed my heavy winter coat, and walked down the brisk city street to the corner coffee shop to meet Odelia. Odelia was a high-powered immigration lawyer, brilliant, incredibly sharp-tongued, and the only person in my life who truly understood the horrifying depth of my family's dysfunction. She was already sitting at a small, quiet table near the frosted window, casually sipping a black coffee. I slid into the leather booth across from her and immediately pushed my phone across the table, the screen brightly displaying Cressida's manipulative post. Odelia pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose, read the post carefully, and let out a dry, utterly humorless laugh. She took another slow sip of coffee, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You have carried this malignant tumor long enough, Maeve. It is time for surgery. And I mean the messy, bloody kind." "You saw the text I sent you late last night?" I asked, my voice tight with suppressed rage. "About the $50,000? Odelia nodded, her expression turning deadly serious, the lawyer taking over the friend. "It is fraud, Maeve. Ethical fraud, certainly, and potentially legally actionable depending on the corporate bylaws. They're bleeding your personal credit dry so Princess Cressida can play corporate boss girl on a rented yacht." "What exactly are you going to do?" "I am pulling the plug on the whole machine," I said, the words tasting like iron and total freedom on my tongue. "But I need to check something in the system first." I pulled out my laptop right there in the crowded coffee shop, connecting to the secure bank portal via my hotspot. I quickly navigated to the back end of the corporate account where my personal financial guarantee was rigidly linked. I refreshed the permissions and requests page. Suddenly, my blood ran ice cold. There was a brand new pending request in the system, submitted at 3 in the morning. Alaric Buildcorp was officially applying to increase the credit limit from $1.5 million to $2 million. And the secondary authorization signature, the one personally guaranteeing the extra $500,000 with my assets, was marked in the system as pending. My own father was actively attempting to either forge my digital consent or completely bypass the bank's security protocols to squeeze another $500,000 out of my name while I slept. "Look at this," I whispered, turning the laptop screen so Odelia could see. She stared at the numbers, her jaw tightening in absolute disgust. "They really think you are profoundly stupid. They think you are just going to roll over and accept bankruptcy because of the word family. My father thinks he can use my name like an infinite blank check forever," I said, calmly snapping the laptop shut. "He thinks I am just a quiet little girl who will tirelessly clean up his messes. But he doesn't realize that in my world, my signature creates money, and it can also completely destroy everything in a single night." Odelia reached across the small table and squeezed my hand firmly. "Do it. Burn it all to the ground. I will review any potential legal blowback for you, but you need to cut the financial cord today." I left the coffee shop feeling a highly dangerous, razor-sharp kind of calm. The pathetic smear campaign online felt entirely insignificant now. Let them have their little Facebook likes and their fake, empty sympathy. They were dancing blindly on the deck of the sinking Titanic, and I was about to quietly rip a giant hole right in the bottom of the hull. But how far were they willing to push me today? By 10 o'clock that morning, I was walking confidently through the towering glass doors of Alaric Buildcorp headquarters. Because I still officially held the title of external financial consultant, my keycard gave me unrestricted, unquestioned access to the entire building. The young receptionist at the front desk gave me a highly nervous, avoiding smile, clearly having seen Cressida's unhinged social media posts that morning. I completely ignored her and walked straight down the executive hallway toward the main boardroom. I knew there was an emergency, high-stakes meeting scheduled for today with their 2 remaining angel investors. These were the wealthy, impatient men who had been aggressively threatening to pull their funding for months, the very men I had been secretly, tirelessly negotiating with behind the scenes to keep them on board. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped quietly into the back of the darkened room just as the main presentation was starting. My father sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, visibly sweating through his expensive tailored suit. My mother was sitting proudly in the corner, playing the role of the supportive, elegant matriarch. And standing confidently at the front of the room, holding a laser pointer like a magic wand, was Cressida. "Gentlemen," Cressida said, her voice dripping with practiced, superficial charm. "I know we have faced some difficult headwinds recently, but as the Director of Communications, I have personally spearheaded a comprehensive, 5-year restructuring strategy that will radically pivot Alaric Buildcorp into the modern era of profitability." She confidently clicked a button on her remote. A complex slide appeared on the giant projector screen. My breath completely caught in my throat. It was my plan. It was the exact, meticulous corporate restructuring plan I had spent 3 exhausting, sleepless months writing. The complex debt-to-equity conversions, the aggressive supplier renegotiation tactics, the intricate payroll streamlining matrices. Every single graph, every single financial projection, every single word was mine. The only difference was that the glossy title page now proudly read, Strategic Pivot, authored by Cressida. She did not even know what half the acronyms on the screen meant. I watched in horrified, sickening fascination as she stumbled awkwardly through the explanation of an EBITDA margin, clearly just reading the bullet points I had carefully drafted without understanding the underlying math. The investors, however, looked moderately impressed, clearly assuming my father's brilliant younger daughter had finally stepped up to save the day. I stood silently in the shadows near the door, my manicured nails digging so hard into the palms of my hands that they almost drew blood. The yacht party was a gross theft of my money. This was the blatant theft of my intellect, my labor, my professional soul. When the agonizing meeting finally ended and the investors filed out of the room, politely patting Alaric on the back, I stepped forward from the shadows and into the harsh fluorescent light. Cressida physically jumped, dropping her laser pointer onto the floor with a clatter. My father's face instantly drained of all color. "Maeve," Alaric stuttered, glancing nervously back at the closed door. "What are you doing here?" "We thought, after the unfortunate scene last night." "I came to see the brand new presentation," I said, walking slowly and deliberately toward the front of the room. I picked up a thick, printed copy of the prospectus from the table, flipping through my own stolen work. "Fascinating, groundbreaking work, Cressida. I particularly liked your deep analysis on the mezzanine debt tranches. Could you explain to me right now how you plan to hedge against the current interest rate hikes?" Cressida's face flushed a deep, ugly, panicked red. That is a very granular detail for the accounting department to handle. I am strictly focusing on the macro vision of the company." "You are strictly focusing on stealing," I said, dropping the heavy packet back onto the table with a loud, echoing smack. "This is my work. You stole my intellectual property to parade around in front of investors like a genius. Don't you dare speak to your sister like that," my mother suddenly shrieked from the corner, rushing over to stand aggressively and protectively next to her golden child. "She is trying her absolute best to save this family while you throw selfish tantrums." I completely ignored Rowena's outburst and looked directly into my father's eyes. "Did you know about this?" Alaric sighed deeply, aggressively rubbing his temples, playing the exhausted, burdened peacemaker. "Maeve, please be reasonable for once." The investors desperately needed to see a fresh, energetic face. Cressida needs the confidence boost for her career. You can always stay in the shadows and handle the boring back-end numbers. You don't need the spotlight. It doesn't matter whose name is on the cover of the report as long as the company survives. Why can't you just let her have a win? I stared at him. The man who had raised me, looking me dead in the eye and demanding I let my sister cannibalize my life's work simply because I didn't need the spotlight. "You're right," I said softly, my voice completely devoid of emotion. The room went dead silent. Cressida immediately smirked, exchanging a triumphant, knowing look with my mother. They thought I had folded. They thought the obedient, pathetic dog had just been successfully brought back to heel. I looked Alaric straight in the eyes, offering a small, terrifyingly cold smile. "You are absolutely right, Father. I don't need the spotlight at all. In fact, starting today, I am retreating entirely into the shadows." I turned around and walked purposefully toward the door. "Wait, Maeve, where are the final signature pages for the bank?" Alaric called out, a sudden, sharp hint of genuine panic slipping into his voice. "The refinancing forms you brought to the dinner last night?" I paused at the door, looking over my shoulder one last time. "I left them at the restaurant. I guess Cressida's brilliant macro vision will just have to handle the bank from now on." I walked out of the room, knowing with absolute certainty that my shadow was about to swallow them all whole. What would they do when the money stopped flowing? I did not go back to my apartment after leaving the Alaric Buildcorp building. I immediately hailed a cab on the busy street and gave the driver the exact address of the main corporate branch of the massive bank that held all of Alaric Buildcorp's loans. It was time to stop making empty threats and start systematically dismantling their lives. I walked purposefully into the towering glass and steel financial building, taking the private elevator straight up to the executive floors. I did not need to schedule an appointment. Sylvia, the formidable senior credit underwriter, had been desperately trying to get a private meeting with me for several weeks. She was an intimidating, brilliant woman in her late 50s, sharp as a tack, and she knew perfectly well that Alaric Build Corp was a rapidly sinking ship. She only approved their massive lines of credit because my name, my flawless professional reputation, and my personal assets were legally tied to their bottom line. I knocked firmly on her open office door. Sylvia looked up from her array of glowing monitors, her thin eyebrows raising in genuine surprise. Maeve, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Please, come in and sit. I sat down in the heavy leather chair directly across from her pristine desk, opened my briefcase, and pulled out a single, heavily notarized legal document that Odelia had drafted for me months ago, an emergency nuclear contingency plan I had sincerely prayed I would never actually have to use against my own blood. I placed it flat on Sylvia's desk, sliding it toward her. I am officially invoking my absolute legal right to withdraw as the personal guarantor for the Alaric Build Corp revolving credit facility, effective immediately. Furthermore, I am categorically denying authorization for any and all limit increases they may request. Sylvia did not touch the piece of paper immediately. She leaned back slowly in her chair, steepling her manicured fingers together, her incredibly sharp eyes studying my face for any sign of hesitation or bluffing. She saw the total lack of emotion, the cold, dead finality in my posture. Maeve, Sylvia said slowly, her voice dropping to a serious, professional whisper. You know exactly what this document means. The very moment I process this paperwork into our system, the company no longer meets our strict risk parameters. The entire $1.5 million credit line will be frozen instantly. I am completely aware, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady. And, because they have already violated several minor covenants regarding liquidity over the past year, Sylvia continued, leaning forward intensely, we will be legally forced to call the entire loan due. They will have exactly 7 days to repay the outstanding balance in full, or we immediately seize the collateral. And since they have no valid collateral left besides the main warehouse property, which is already heavily leveraged, they will face total collapse. 7 days, I repeated softly. That is standard banking protocol. I fully expect you to follow it to the letter, Sylvia. Do not give them an inch. She looked down at the document, then back up at me. A faint, almost imperceptible smile of respect touched the corners of her mouth. She had dealt with my arrogant, blustering father enough times to know exactly what kind of foolish man he was. Consider it done, Maeve. I will issue the formal default and freeze notices by Monday morning. I stood up, shaking her hand firmly. The very first massive domino had just been brutally pushed over. But I was far from done. I walked out of the towering bank and sat on a quiet park bench nearby, pulling out my phone. My second call of the day was to the managing partner of the elite corporate law firm I had been paying $2,500 a month out of pocket just to protect Alaric Build Corp from its own incompetence. This is Maeve, I said clearly the moment he answered. Cancel my monthly retainer immediately. Cease any and all legal protection for Alaric Build Corp. If their suppliers attempt to sue them, let the lawsuits go through unopposed. Are you absolutely sure about this, Maeve? The lawyer asked, sounding genuinely shocked. They currently have 3 incredibly angry lumber suppliers who are ready to file massive liens against their remaining inventory the second we step away on Monday. Let them file, I said coldly. It is no longer my problem to solve. I hung up the phone. I sat alone on the bench, watching the busy city traffic move by, feeling a strange, intoxicating, powerful lightness rapidly spreading through my chest. The crushing, toxic guilt that had weighed me down for years was entirely gone. I spent the next 2 uninterrupted hours meticulously downloading every single financial report, every damning email proving my father's gross incompetence, and the exact transaction logs of Cressida's $50,000 yacht party withdrawal. I packed it all onto a highly encrypted flash drive. The bomb was fully armed and aggressively ticking. The bank would strike with no mercy. The expensive lawyers would completely abandon them. The angry, unpaid suppliers would swarm the company like starving vultures. In exactly 7 days, the flawless facade of their perfect upper-class life would violently shatter into a million irreparable pieces. But before the explosion hit Chicago, there was still one more incredibly important person who needed to know the absolute truth. Someone whose judgment my parents feared more than anything else in the world. I checked my watch. I had just enough time to pack a small bag and catch the evening flight to the West Coast. Who was I going to see? The long flight from Chicago to Seattle felt entirely too long, yet somehow not nearly long enough to process what I was about to do. I sat silently by the small window, watching the dark, endless expanse of the country slip by underneath, mentally tracing the exact outline of my battle plan. I was flying across the country to see my grandfather, Thaddeus. Thaddeus was an 82-year-old retired commercial real estate magnate. He was a man carved directly from granite, sharp, utterly ruthless to liars, and the only person in our entire extended family who possessed true, self-made, generational wealth. He lived alone in a sprawling, breathtaking modernist mansion overlooking the dark waters of Lake Washington. He barely tolerated Alaric, his own son, but he had always deeply respected me because he recognized the exact same cold, calculating, unstoppable drive in me that had built his massive empire from nothing. It was raining heavily when my cab finally pulled up to his imposing estate early Saturday morning. I rang the doorbell and his longtime housekeeper let me in out of the cold. I found Thaddeus sitting quietly in the spectacular glass-walled conservatory, meticulously pruning an ancient bonsai tree. He looked up, his pale, piercing blue eyes narrowing sharply as he took in my unannounced arrival and the deeply exhausted, haunted look on my face. "Maeve," he said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. "You look like you've been to a war." "I have," I said simply. I did not cry. I did not offer dramatic, emotional hugs. I walked straight to the glass patio table, set down my heavy leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick, terrifyingly detailed binder filled with the financial printouts and logs I had organized. "You always taught me from a young age that numbers do not lie, Grandpa. I need you to look very closely at what your son has been doing." Thaddeus wiped his rough hands on a towel and sat heavily across from me. He put on his reading glasses and opened the thick binder. I sat in absolute silence as he read. I watched his strong jaw visibly tighten as he meticulously reviewed the disastrous profit and loss statements. I watched his eyes darken like a storm cloud as he read the desperate emails of me pleading with Alaric to stop his reckless, insane spending. And finally, I watched his large hands turn into tight, trembling fists when he saw the official bank ledger clearly showing the $50,000 withdrawal for Cressida's useless yacht party. "They used your personal credit line to rent a boat," Thaddeus stated, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet, lethal whisper. "Yes," I said, my voice unwavering. "And at their anniversary dinner, right after I secured that money to save them, my father stood up and proudly announced to the entire family that Cressida was their only real child." Thaddeus violently closed the binder. The heavy silence in the conservatory was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic sound of the heavy rain hitting the glass roof above us. When he finally spoke, his voice held a terrifying tremor, but it was absolutely not from age or frailty. It was from a deep, volcanic, world-ending rage. "There is something you deeply need to know, Maeve," Thaddeus said, leaning forward, his intense eyes locking onto mine. "Something I never told you because I foolishly assumed it was being handled correctly by your parents. It seems I was a colossal fool." My brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What do you mean?" "When you were 18 and got accepted into that prestigious, expensive finance program, Alaric came to me crying and told me they could not afford the tuition," Thaddeus explained, his voice laced with pure disgust. "I immediately set up a private, ironclad trust. Every single year, for the past 16 years, I have personally wired $100,000 into an account managed directly by your mother. It was specifically, legally designated for your education, your first apartment, and your early investments." The breath violently left my lungs in a sudden rush. The beautiful room spun around me. I paid for my own college, I whispered, the horrifying realization hitting me like a physical blow to the chest. I took out crippling student loans. I worked 2 terrible jobs. I never saw a single dime of that money. Thaddeus's face turned into a terrifying mask of pure fury. I know. Looking at these ledgers right now, I know exactly where my money went. Rowena used your trust fund to buy her ridiculous country club memberships, her designer bags, and Cressida's useless PR degree. They hadn't just neglected me emotionally. They hadn't just used my credit to survive. They had actively, maliciously stolen my financial future, a massive fortune that was rightfully mine, just to fund their golden child's delusions. The betrayal was so absolute, so structurally, unforgivably evil, that I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat, though my face remained completely still. Thaddeus stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the stone floor. He walked purposefully over to the antique telephone resting on a side table. He did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He punched in a number and waited, tapping his heavy cane rhythmically and aggressively against the floor. Arthur, Thaddeus barked aggressively into the phone, addressing his chief legal counsel. Get over to the house right now. Yes, it is an absolute emergency. Bring the estate documents. All of them. We are completely rewriting the will today, and we are initiating an aggressive, total asset freeze. He slammed the phone down and turned back to me. The old man looked suddenly energized, like a ruthless predator smelling blood in the water. They honestly think they can steal from my blood and humiliate the only competent person in that pathetic excuse for a family? We are going to burn their entire forest down, Maeve. Not a single branch will be left standing. I sat back in my chair, listening to the soothing rain. The financial bomb in Chicago was ticking loudly, but the real, devastating airstrike had just been called in from Seattle. Thank you for listening to my story. If you're still here with me, please drop a comment saying I'm Win so I know you're part of the squad. I will heart and reply to every single comment with that keyword. Keep watching, because what happened on Monday morning was beyond anything I could have imagined. Arthur, the chief legal counsel for my grandfather's estate, arrived at the mansion in less than 30 minutes. He was a tall, severe-looking man who wore a dark suit even on a rainy Saturday morning. He carried a thick leather briefcase and looked mildly alarmed by the urgency in Thaddeus's voice over the phone. Arthur walked into the glass conservatory, shook the rain from his umbrella, and took a seat at the patio table. Thaddeus did not offer him coffee or pleasantries. My grandfather simply pushed the thick binder of financial evidence across the table. Read it, Thaddeus commanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. Arthur adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the binder. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the heavy rain beating against the glass roof and the rustling of paper. I sat quietly, watching the lawyer's face shift from professional curiosity to deep, unmistakable shock. He looked at the bank ledgers, the stolen credit line, the yacht party invoice, and finally, the records of my stolen trust fund. Arthur closed the binder slowly and took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Sir, this is staggering. The misuse of the educational trust fund alone is grounds for severe civil litigation. Rowena has systematically drained hundreds of thousands of dollars intended for Maeve. And the corporate fraud. I do not care about dragging them through a public court right now, Thaddeus interrupted, leaning heavily on his cane. I want to cut the oxygen supply. Today. Understood, Arthur said, pulling a legal pad from his briefcase. What are your instructions? First, Thaddeus said, his eyes hard and unyielding. I am changing my last will and testament. Alaric is disinherited. Rowena is disinherited. Cressida is disinherited. Every single piece of real estate, every stock portfolio, every liquid asset I own goes directly to Maeve, with a 10% portion allocated to the Seattle Children's Hospital. Draft the new documents today. I will sign them before you leave this house. Arthur nodded, his pen moving swiftly across the paper. I will have my associates draft the revised will immediately. And the trust fund. Thaddeus turned to look at me, his expression softening just a fraction. The trust fund I set up for you is managed by a private banking firm here in Seattle. Rowena was the custodial signatory because you were a minor when it was established, and she somehow maintained that control. We are freezing it. Thaddeus picked up his phone and called his private banker. It was a Saturday, but when you have the kind of money my grandfather had, bankers answer on the first ring. "This is Thaddeus," he barked into the receiver. "I need an immediate, unilateral freeze placed on the custodial trust account managed by Rowena." "Yes, right now." "Block all outbound transfers, cancel all linked debit or credit cards, and flag the account for internal review. If she tries to buy a pack of gum with that money, I want the card declined." He hung up the phone and looked at me. "It is done." A strange, overwhelming sense of relief washed over me. For my entire life, I had fought my battles entirely alone. I had defended myself against my mother's gaslighting, my sister's vicious jealousy, and my father's constant exploitation. But sitting in that beautiful, rain-swept conservatory, I finally had someone standing in front of me, shielding me. I finally had a protector. Arthur worked furiously for the next few hours. By early afternoon, the new will was typed, printed, and signed by Thaddeus, with the housekeeper and Arthur's assistant acting as formal witnesses. My parents and my sister were officially cut off from the generational wealth they had been banking on for their retirement. I hugged my grandfather tightly before I left for the airport. He smelled like expensive cedar and old books. "Do not feel sorry for them, Maeve," Thaddeus whispered fiercely in my ear. "They chose their path. Now they have to walk it." I flew back to Chicago that evening. The storm clouds from Seattle gave way to a clear, star-filled night sky over the Midwest. I looked out the small airplane window, watching the city lights of Chicago grow larger as we descended. Tomorrow was Sunday, a day of quiet preparation. But Monday morning was coming. Monday was the day Cressida was throwing her lavish, $50,000 yacht party to celebrate her stolen achievements. She had no idea that the ocean beneath her was about to dry up. Monday morning arrived with a bright, mocking sunshine. I did not put on a suit. I did not tie my hair back into my usual tight corporate bun. Instead, I wore comfortable jeans and a soft sweater, walking down to a quiet, upscale cafe a few blocks from my apartment. I ordered a double espresso, sat at a corner table, and placed my phone face up on the table. I turned the ringer off, but left the vibration on. It was 8:45 in the morning. At exactly 9 o'clock, Sylvia at the bank would officially process my withdrawal as the personal guarantor for Alaric Buildcorp. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It tasted rich and perfectly bitter. At 9:15, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Declan, the head accountant. He had promised to be my eyes and ears inside the building. "The bank just sent the formal notice," Declan texted. Sylvia did not waste any time. The email went directly to Alaric, myself, and the entire executive board. "The credit line is frozen." They called the loan due. $1.5 million payable in 48 hours. I smiled, typing back a single word, "Beautiful." 10 minutes later, my phone began to vibrate violently against the wooden table. The screen lit up with Alaric's name. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. Then he called again. And again. And again. In the span of 20 minutes, my father called me 40 separate times. He left frantic, breathless voicemails, his voice escalating from demanding to begging. "Maeve, pick up the phone," his first voicemail barked. "There is some kind of massive clerical error at the bank. Sylvia has frozen the accounts. Call her and fix this immediately." By the 15th voicemail, his tone had shifted to sheer panic. "Maeve, please. Please answer me. The suppliers are calling. The checks we wrote on Friday are bouncing. You have to put your name back on the account. We are going to lose the warehouses." I deleted every single voicemail without finishing them. Declan kept the updates coming. "It is total chaos here," he texted at 10:30. "Alaric is screaming at his secretary. He just found out your law firm sent a formal notice of withdrawal. The 3 lumber suppliers we owe money to just got word that we have no legal representation. They are filing emergency liens against our remaining inventory as we speak." The dominoes were falling faster than even I had anticipated. Alaric Buildcorp was a house of cards, and without my money and my brain acting as the glue, a single gust of wind was enough to level it. But the true masterpiece of the morning was yet to come. At 11:15, Cressida's yacht party was scheduled to begin boarding at the downtown harbor. She had invited over 100 guests, investors, local influencers, and all of her fake, wealthy socialite friends. Rowena was there, dressed head to toe in designer labels, ready to play the proud mother of the brilliant young executive. My phone buzzed again. This time it was not Declan. It was a forwarded text from Aunt Vesper, the family gossip, who was currently at the harbor. "Maeve, something terrible is happening at the docks," Vesper wrote, her text dripping with frantic energy. "The yacht manager won't let anyone on board. Rowena is screaming at him." I leaned back in my chair, picturing the scene. Cressida had used the corporate credit line to pay the initial deposit for the yacht. But the remaining balance, a hefty $30,000 for the catering, the champagne, and the staff, was supposed to be charged to Rowena's platinum card this morning. The same platinum card that was linked to the trust fund Thaddeus had frozen on Saturday. I could vividly imagine Rowena, her face flushed with humiliation, standing on the wooden pier in her high heels, furiously tapping her card against the payment terminal, only to see the word "declined" flash in bright red letters. At 11:30, my father's phone calls stopped. A minute later, Declan texted me the climax of the morning. "Alaric just ran out of his office looking like he was having a heart attack," Declan wrote. "Rowena called him from the harbor. Her cards are bouncing. The yacht company is threatening to call the police for theft of services because the caterers already set up the food. The investors who showed up for the party are standing on the dock watching the whole family melt down. It is over, Maeve. The company is dead." I picked up my empty espresso cup, walked over to the counter, and threw it in the trash. I stepped out into the warm Chicago air, feeling lighter than I had in a decade. While my father was hyperventilating in his office and my mother was being publicly humiliated by a harbor manager, my sister Cressida was busy digging her own grave on the internet. Before the chaos at the docks fully erupted, Cressida had started a live stream on her Instagram. She had over 30,000 followers, mostly bought or gained through her endless posts pretending to be a self-made corporate girl boss. I sat on a park bench by the river, opened my fake Instagram account, and tuned into her live feed. Cressida was holding her phone high, posing against the backdrop of the massive white yacht. "Hey guys," she said, flipping her hair. "We are just about to board for the Alaric Buildcorp rebranding launch. I have worked so hard on this strategic pivot. It just goes to show that when you block out toxic, jealous energy from certain family members, you can truly thrive." She smiled her signature, smug smile. But then, the camera captured something moving in the background. It was the harbor manager, a burly man with a clipboard, marching directly toward Cressida and Rowena. "Ma'am, you need to turn the camera off and step away from the vessel," the manager's voice boomed clearly through the phone's microphone. "Your mother's payment has been declined by 5 different banks. Your corporate card is returning a fraud alert. We are canceling the charter." Cressida's face dropped. The smugness vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. She fumbled with the phone, trying to end the live stream, but her manicured nails kept missing the button. Thousands of people watched as Rowena shrieked in the background, "Do you know who I am? Run the card again. My father-in-law is a billionaire." The live stream abruptly ended, but the internet is forever. The screen recordings were already circulating. It was time for the final blow. I opened our massive extended family group chat. It had over 50 members, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and close family friends. This was the same group chat where they had all praised Cressida for her brilliant presentation just a few days ago, and where they had sent prayers for my supposed mental breakdown. I did not write a long, emotional paragraph. I let the evidence speak for itself. I uploaded a single, comprehensive PDF document. I had titled it, "The Real Alaric Buildcorp Pivot." The first page contained the undeniable proof of Cressida's theft, the side-by-side comparison of my original corporate restructuring plan, time-stamped 3 months ago, next to the identical presentation Cressida had given to the investors. The second page contained the bank ledgers, clearly highlighting the $50,000 withdrawal for the yacht party, authorized by Alaric and Cressida, effectively draining the company's operating funds. The third and final page contained screenshots of my personal bank statements, proving that I had been sending $2,500 of my own money every month just to keep the lawyers from letting the company sink, while Rowena spent her days shopping. I hit send. Within 60 seconds, my phone exploded. Aunt Vesper, who just yesterday had called me an unstable, jealous sister, was the very first to reply to the group chat. Oh my God. Cressida stole Maeve's work? They used Maeve's credit to rent that boat. Cousins started chiming in, their messages reflecting pure shock and disgust. I cannot believe this. You lied about her on Facebook, Cressida. Uncle Alaric, you let Maeve pay your legal bills while you drove a Porsche? Cressida, sitting in the back of an Uber after fleeing the docks, tried to do damage control. She sent a frantic message to the group. Those documents are forged. Maeve is hacking the system to ruin me. But Declan, the silent hero of the story, delivered the kill shot. He replied directly to Cressida in the main chat. They are not forged, Cressida. I am the head accountant. I provided Maeve with the ledgers. You stole her work, you bankrupted the company for a party, and your father let you do it. I have already submitted my formal resignation. Silence fell over the chat. The undeniable truth was out. I switched over to Facebook and Instagram. The backlash was instantaneous. Family members and friends were unfollowing Cressida by the hundreds. People were leaving scathing comments on her toxic family post from the day before. The investors, having witnessed the yacht fiasco and received the true financial reports from Declan, formally pulled their funding. Cressida's carefully curated, fake social standing crumbled to absolute dust in less than an hour. She was exposed as a fraud, a thief, and a bully. I walked back to my apartment, ordering a large pizza and a bottle of good red wine. I felt a deep, profound peace. I had reclaimed my narrative. But just as I was pouring my first glass of wine, a violent, desperate pounding echoed through my hallway. Someone was hammering their fists against my front door. Maeve. Open this door. Please, Maeve, you have to open the door. It is your father. I slowly walked to the front door, the glass of red wine steady in my hand. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. My father stood in the hallway. The sight of him was genuinely shocking. He looked as though he had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. His expensive custom suit was deeply wrinkled, his tie was pulled loose, and his face was pale, covered in a sheen of terrified sweat. He did not yell. He did not puff out his chest and demand obedience like he usually did. Instead, Alaric literally fell to his knees in my doorway, his hands trembling. Maeve, please, he begged, his voice cracking horribly. You have to save us. Sylvia is calling the loan. The suppliers are seizing the warehouses. The investors are gone. Everything is gone. Please, you have to call the bank. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you will guarantee the debt again. I looked down at the man who had allowed my sister to steal my work. The man who had proudly announced to a room full of people that I was not his real child. Get up off my floor, I said coldly. He scrambled to his feet, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his suit pocket. Look, I brought the new authorization forms. All you have to do is sign them. Just forge a backdated signature, Maeve. We can trick the bank. We can say the withdrawal was an administrative error. Please. I stared at him in sheer disgust. He was not just incompetent. He was asking me to commit federal bank fraud to save him from his own stupidity. You want me to commit a felony for you? I asked, my voice dangerously low. It is for family. Alaric pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. You do not have a family, I replied, my gaze drilling into his terrified soul. You clearly stated that you only have one child. So, I highly suggest you take those papers, hand them to Cressida, and let your brilliant, macrovision daughter save the company. I stepped back and slammed the heavy door directly in his face. I heard him sob in the hallway, a pathetic, broken sound. He knocked a few more times, very weakly, before dragging himself to the elevator. Over the next 2 months, the collapse of Alaric Build Corp was spectacular and ruthless. With the credit line frozen and the loan called due, the bank swiftly seized all of their commercial assets. The massive warehouses were padlocked. The delivery trucks were repossessed in the middle of the night. Within 60 days, Alaric Build Corp officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, liquidating everything they owned just to pay off the furious suppliers and the aggressive tax auditors who had suddenly taken a very keen interest in their books. Without the company income, and with Rowena's trust fund entirely frozen by Thaddeus, their personal lives unraveled just as violently. They had taken out a massive second mortgage on their luxury mansion to keep up appearances, fully counting on my money to cover the hidden gaps. When they missed 3 consecutive payments, the bank foreclosed. My parents were evicted from the sprawling home they had lived in for decades. They were forced to move into a cramped, deeply unpleasant 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Rowena, desperate for cash to pay for basic groceries and utilities, was forced to sell off her beloved collection of Hermes bags and Cartier watches to a local pawn shop. Cressida's fate was equally fitting. Her reputation in the corporate world was permanently ruined. The viral video of her screaming at the docks, combined with the leaked PDF proving she stole my work, made her utterly unemployable in the public relations sector. No agency would touch her. Faced with crushing credit card debt, the former director of communications was forced to take a minimum wage job as a retail sales clerk at a low-end cosmetics store in a dying mall. They tried, desperately, to reach out to Thaddeus. Alaric called his father crying, begging for a bailout. Rowena sent endless, dramatic letters. Cressida even tried to show up at his estate in Seattle. But Thaddeus was a fortress. He instructed his security guards to turn Cressida away at the gate. He blocked their phone numbers. He refused to read their letters. The financial and emotional wall he built around them was impenetrable. They were entirely on their own, drowning in the mess they had spent years digging. And I did not lift a single finger to throw them a life raft. The final nail in their coffin came a few weeks later. Thaddeus arranged a formal Zoom meeting, demanding the presence of Alaric, Rowena, Cressida, and myself. I sat at the desk in my apartment sipping tea. When the video feed connected, the visual contrast was jarring. I looked rested, calm, and professional. My parents and sister sat huddled around a laptop in their dark, cramped apartment, looking hollowed out, exhausted, and bitter. Thaddeus sat in his leather armchair, flanked by Arthur, his lawyer. He did not waste time with greetings. "I called you here to make my final legal decisions explicitly clear," Thaddeus said, his voice echoing through the speakers. "My new will is officially filed. Alaric, you and your wife and your youngest daughter are permanently removed from the estate. Maeve is the sole inheritor of all my assets." Rowena let out a sharp, genuine scream, burying her face in her hands. Alaric just stared blankly at the screen, a broken man. Cressida glared at me through the camera, her eyes full of venom, but her power utterly gone. Furthermore, Thaddeus continued, ignoring Rowena's sobbing. "The trust fund I established for Maeve has been fully audited. Rowena, you stole over $800,000 from your own daughter over the years. My lawyers have advised me that I have the right to press criminal charges for fraud." Rowena gasped, her sobbing stopping instantly, replaced by sheer terror. "However," Thaddeus said slowly, "Maeve asked me not to send you to prison. She said poverty is a much better teacher for people like you. The trust is closed. The remaining balance has been transferred directly to Maeve. Do not ever contact me again." He ended the call. Just like that, the final cord was cut. I closed my laptop and let out a long, shuddering breath. The war was officially over. I had won, but the victory felt solemn, a quiet laying to rest of ghosts that had haunted me for 34 years. Just then, my apartment door unlocked, and Lachlan walked in. I had met Lachlan, a talented landscape architect, shortly after the chaos settled. He was 36, incredibly grounded, and carried a quiet, sturdy warmth that I desperately needed. He did not care about corporate titles or high society drama. He walked in carrying 2 large, vibrant potted ferns. "I brought reinforcements," he smiled, setting them down by the balcony door. "You said this place needed more life." I walked over and wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my head against his chest. He smelled like fresh earth and rain. He knew the whole story. He knew about the yacht, the stolen work, the frozen trust. He never offered empty platitudes. He just showed up, consistent and kind. "How was the call?" Lachlan asked softly, resting his chin on top of my head. "It's done," I whispered. "They're gone." "Good," he said simply. "Now we focus on us." While Lachlan was helping me plant the ferns on the balcony, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Odelia. My brilliant lawyer friend had delivered on her promise. She had officially drafted and served a ruthless cease and desist letter to Aunt Vesper and the few remaining flying monkeys in the extended family who were still trying to harass me via email. Odelia's letter threatened immediate defamation lawsuits against anyone who spoke my name or attempted to contact my workplace. The harassment stopped instantly. Bullies are cowards when faced with real consequences. I walked back into my bedroom, pulled open my nightstand drawer, and took out my old phone, the one with the SIM card that connected me to my past. I removed the tiny plastic chip, took a pair of heavy scissors, and cut it clean in half. I dropped the pieces into the trash can. The Maeve who existed to fix their problems was dead. Tomorrow, I was going to wake up and build an empire of my own. 1 year later, I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my brand-new corner office on the 40th floor, looking out over the sprawling Chicago skyline. The glass plaque on the heavy oak door behind me read, "Maeve and Associates, Corporate Restructuring and Financial Strategy." I had taken the money Thaddeus salvaged from my stolen trust fund and used it to launch my own firm. Without the suffocating weight of my family holding me back, my career skyrocketed. My fierce reputation for saving dying companies, gained from years of secretly propping up my father's business, made me incredibly sought after. Just an hour ago, I had signed my biggest client yet. It was a massive, $20 million contract to restructure the debts of a rapidly expanding tech conglomerate. Life has a very funny way of balancing the scales. The irony of my new success was almost poetic. The tech conglomerate I just signed had recently purchased a massive plot of commercial land on the edge of the city to build their new server farms. It was the exact same plot of land where an old, defunct lumber warehouse used to sit. Through the corporate grapevine, I learned that Alaric, my former CEO father who used to brag about his wealth at the country club, was now employed by that very tech company. He was working the graveyard shift as a low-level security guard, patrolling the exact same land he used to buy materials from, wearing a cheap polyester uniform to pay his rent. I didn't feel the need to gloat. I didn't drive down there to rub my success in his face. The universe had already delivered the perfect, agonizing punchline to his life. My parents and Cressida had built their entire identities on a foundation of lies, cruelty, and stolen labor. When that foundation was ripped away, they collapsed into exactly what they always were, weak, bitter, and entirely ordinary. I walked back to my desk and looked at the framed photo sitting next to my monitor. It was a picture of me, Lachlan, Thaddeus, and Odelia, taken during a weekend trip to Seattle. We were laughing, our faces relaxed and genuinely happy. It took me 34 years of pain and a spectacular, fiery revenge to learn the most important truth of my life. Family is not defined by blood. Blood is just biology. Family is defined by respect. It is the people who stand by you when you are terrified, the people who protect you when you are vulnerable, and the people who celebrate your brilliance without trying to steal your light. I stopped setting myself on fire just to keep my toxic parents and sister warm. And in doing so, I finally learned how to shine on my own. Many people, especially those in the older generations of my extended family, whispered that I was too cold. They said I was cruel for letting my own parents fall into poverty, for not giving them a second chance when they were begging on their knees. So, I turned to you. Do you think I went too far? If your family treated you like an invisible ATM, stole your life's work to praise your sibling, and publicly disowned you for a laugh, would you have delivered the final blow like I did? Or would you have forgiven them? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to type "I'm win" so I can find your comment and reply. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more true stories about surviving toxic families and taking back your power. Thank you for walking this journey with me.